Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos. Soy Laura de aquí del equipo de la AMMEV y voy a introducir a Julieanna Hever, que nos va a estar acompañando el día de hoy y nos va a dar un webinar muy interesante para conocer sobre los mitos de nutrición. Ella es una nutrióloga reconocida a nivel mundial, es autora, conferencista y aparte tiene un podcast que se llama Choose You. Y bueno, vamos a empezar. Julieanna, thank you so much for being here with us. Go ahead.
Thank you, Laura Rodriguez and AMMEV for having me, and thank you all for being here today. I'm going to start my keynote here. Okay, everyone see that? Okay, I hope so. All right, well, I am excited today. I realized that when I became a registered dietitian, it did take me long to find out that my real job title should be nutrition myth debunker, because that is what I spend most of my time doing. There are so many myths about nutrition out there. In fact, I always say that everybody eats, so therefore everybody has an opinion on what we should and shouldn't eat, particularly when it comes to plants and plant-based diets. Those myths and opinions are pervasive and profound and very, very loud. So today, I hope to give you some reassurance, to untangle some confusing messages, and inspire you to continue your own journey with confident curiosity. How do you see nutrition? Do you see it as fuel? Do you see it as a detailed set of biochemical processes, or do you see it as a beautiful plate? It is possible, of course, to look at it from all of these different perspectives, constantly evolving our understanding and appreciation for the many metabolic, medicinal, and other magnificent elements that food broadly embroils. Perhaps the most controversial, confusing, and provocative sciences of all is nutrition. So for comparison, if you think about chemistry, we've got formulas and equations and not a lot of chaos. Or if you look at anatomy or physiology, scientists have named parts and processes without exorbitant ongoing debate or critique by the public. But on the contrary, as I mentioned, everybody eats. And so therefore, everyone has an opinion on what we're supposed to eat. And add to that, that food is deeply, inextricably intertwined with our sense of self, our culture, our families, our relationships, our memories, everything. And then finally, the media, it makes mania and mayhem when it comes to food trends and weight loss and anything related to diet. All you have to do is ask Dr. Google about something like carbs, and you get as many opinions as there are websites. Somehow the science of nutrition and health has taken a backseat to a confluence of opinions and a whole lot of debate. So I think many of us here know the myriad advantages of a whole food plant-based diet, and I will summarize them a little bit later just to be certain. But I wanted to deflate a few myths today. The famous economist Milton Friedman once quoted an unknown source in a talk he gave on 5 economic myths that a myth is like an air mattress. There's nothing in it, but it's wonderfully comfortable, and deflation causes an uncomfortable jolt. So I want to borrow that analogy today, and I hope to give you all a little bit of an uncomfortable jolt today. I'd like to address 5 pervasive myths, just some of them. There's so many, but for today, we're going to talk about first that nutrition is not an emergency, and then carbohydrate is not a food group. I just realized that if you probably see that I can't get rid of this thing too, because you're looking at my screen. Is that true? I'm having a hard time technically here. Stop. There we go. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this, and now I'm going to go in. Sorry. Now you can probably see better. Okay, so, and then I'm going to talk about how skipping meals does not destroy your metabolism. And finally, there is no perfect diet. So let's begin with nutrition. Is nutrition an emergency? According to the World Health Organization, in 2015, almost 2 billion adults worldwide were overweight. More than 600 million of those were obese, while 462 million were underweight. In that same year, 42 million children under the age of 5 were overweight or obese, but 156 million were affected by stunting, which is low height for age, while 50 million were affected by wasting, which is low weight for height. Poor nutrition continues to cause nearly half of deaths in children under 5, while low and middle income countries now witness a simultaneous rise in childhood overweight and obesity, increasing at a rate of 30% faster than in richer nations. This double burden of malnutrition offers a unique and important opportunity for integrated action on malnutrition in all of its form. And still, even within this redefined context, this deficiency model persists. We employ the term standard Western diet to describe wealthy pockets of societies who have access to rich, calorically dense, and expensive foods. Affluence was once attached to wealth and the food that wealth provided. It came packaged with the respective diseases of affluence, non-communicable diseases such as heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disease, diabetes. But today, the diet of affluence is not limited to the wealthy, and the availability of calorie-dense, nutrient-poor food has expanded beyond prosperous pockets and catapulted most of the entire world into this current obesity epidemic. Worldwide obesity has nearly tripled since 1975. This is creating a paradoxical situation of simultaneous under and over nutrition. But I will argue today that if we choose diet carefully, both of these can be solved with a unified approach. Is nutrition an emergency? With the rise of worldwide overnutrition, are we really seeing an incidence of deficiency? In graduate school, I was taught about scurvy and pellagra and rickets, but I've never in my 17 years of practice now seen any of those. Rather, I see chronic diseases caused at least in part. I see every single day. So if there's any consistent message over the last century, it's that too much nutrition is not better than not enough. So what advantage does our plant-based diet confer? We know that beyond the fuel components of nutrition, we have a finite number of vitamin and mineral needs to be met. And most of these vitamin-based nutrition is synthesized by plants. And the mineral-based requirements are conveyed by plants from the soil. They're photosynthesized into more complex biomolecules to sustain plant life, defense, and reproduction. Then animals eat these plants and they further concentrate various important nutrients, but unfortunately, they also concentrate unhealthy biologically active molecules too. So this becomes a tenuous balance of getting enough of the right thing and not too much of the wrong thing. Our general response from a position of deficiency or avoiding deficiency, it always centers on more is better. We need more protein, we need more this, you're getting enough this, enough that. It's just the constant dialogue that you hear in the healthcare circles, on the media, everywhere. But if you look at the health span and longevity evidence, it does not support the more is better model. Using dietary restriction without malnutrition, yeast, worms, flies, mice, and monkeys have demonstrated an increase of lifespan and health span, the healthy years, and they basically restricted a diet of 30 to 40% ad libitum feeding. They found that can increase lifespan up to 50%. In higher level mammals using dietary restriction, we see protection against cancer, diabetes, autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, and protection against neurodegeneration. Short-term human trials demonstrate many of the same early biomarkers seen in other organisms. Which brings us back to the myth. Nutrition is not an emergency. Chronic overnutrition is driving poor health, and nearly a century of longevity research seems to indicate that less is more when it comes to health span. What about carbohydrates? I'm used to being in a room and I could ask people, how many of you hear all the time that I'm trying to avoid carbs? So raise your hand or think about it. How many times do you hear people talking about, oh, I can't do carbs, I'm avoiding carbs, don't eat carbs? What does that even mean? Cotton, book paper, the chitin of crab shells, potatoes, legumes, sugar, and rice. These are all carbohydrates. But obviously, these are not isometabolic food for humans. So if the word carbohydrate didn't exist, how else could we even group these disparate substances together? It's like comparing apples to orange juice. And as long as we call all of these substances carbs, we're going to stay so confused. I don't think any of you here listening today would put a wonderful health promoting lentil stew in the same category as the average fortified sugar laden breakfast cereal. But believe it or not, there are plenty of randomized, blinded, controlled gold standard studies that juggle macronutrient ratios exactly like that. Compared to what is the question not asked often enough. By organizing foods in these isoenergetic groups, they have same amount of calories, same amount of carbs, we've created this unimaginable mess and fueled endless unproductive carb versus fat debates. Here's another example. Is a potato a carbohydrate? So many people want to basically dietary equate a whole potato with highly processed junk food, like potato chips or French fries, but it's completely inaccurate to do so. And it's led to some poor national food policy positions and consumer guidelines. In Jennifer Wolf's work, The Potato Diet, she points out that contrary to popular opinion that potatoes are rich, evidence is clear that unless fried, where you infuse it with all of that oil, potatoes contain high quality protein and many nutrients. So if you get all your daily requirements with potato, it could actually become a sole source of dietary protein, which sounds so shocking. But if you look at the nutrient database, you'll see that it's. If you look at here, I'm going to show you the database from the USDA nutrient database. To back this up, you look at the baked potato gram for gram, and it actually has a better amino acid score than 90% lean beef. And basically at 100, it's referring to a complete protein. So by this point, there's a term I use, I call it macro confusion. And it's because we're so confused when we talk about all of these different macronutrients as food products. So it obviously, right, a carbohydrate is not a food group. I think the ultimate example of this was a study in 2018 in the Lancet Journal, and they concluded that both low carb diets and high carb diets increase mortality. It's so confusing. And what does that even mean? So potatoes as a source of dietary protein sounds like nutritional heresy, but the facts are clear. And we all know that protein isn't a problem on a plant-based diet, but let's take a closer look at the king of macronutrients. Where do we get our protein? Before we look forward in the diet, let's make sure everyone is clear on what protein is and how it's used as an element of all life. Proteins are the building blocks of life. They form the basis for every structure and function in all living organisms. Enzymes and fibers and hormones and antibodies, all of that. But protein is not a food group. This is a protein. This is not a protein. This is an egg. Eggs do contain protein, but so do potatoes and beans and all things living. In fact, all plants have all amino acids in different ratios. And every living cell, potato and chicken alike, contain thousands of proteins. It's not just a single substance. No more than you could say metal would adequately describe something like iron or aluminum or gold, right? Protein isn't descriptive enough in a dietary sense. We need more information. Our real quest in dietary protein is to acquire the necessary essential amino acids for life, the ones that we have to get from our diet that we can't produce in our bodies. So loosely speaking, there are 20 amino acids, which act much like the 26 letters of the alphabet. When you digest a plant or an animal protein, they're broken down into the individual parts, and the individual letters, and then we put it back together and string them back into words and sentences and paragraphs of our genetic book of life. The problem is that no animal makes all of those 20 amino acids. So it's kind of like protein jeopardy. We must buy a vowel through diet to complete the words. So this brings us back to our original question. Where do we get our protein? I want to dig a little deeper here and hope to drive home the point that each of the 10 trillion cells in your body have thousands of different proteins that carry out an amazing array of activity that we call life. The DNA of all organisms is the blueprint for the tens of thousands of proteins that make up all living cells. Animals, unlike plants, must acquire some of the amino acid building blocks, the essential amino acids, through diet, and then these are used in our ribosomes as part of the RNA printing press to produce the myriad proteins and that are required for all of our various structures and physiological life-giving functions. So we don't literally or exactly have a need for dietary protein in a strict biological sense, but rather we need a source of nitrogen to synthesize those non-essential amino acids, and we need a dietary source of essential amino acids, those subset that we cannot make. Despite our need for a subset of those essential amino acids, the 10 to 25,000 different proteins are synthesized in cellular ribosomes. The word protein, the idea of protein, was a convenient isocaloric organic chemistry organization scheme over 170 years ago, and it really stuck. So I want to answer the question accurately and concisely in a way that you've probably never heard it answered before. When someone says, where do you get your protein? It's synthesized in our ribosomes, and it doesn't originate in our diet. Let's take this one step further and remind ourselves where essential amino acids originate. So I wish I could see your hands, but I'm curious how many of you are frustrated by this conflicting dietary advice about protein and carbs and fat. And we know that a low-fat diet is healthy. We know that a high-fat diet can be healthy because you look at the Okinawan diet, which is a very low-fat diet, longest lived people in the world. The opposite of that would be the Mediterranean diet, which other very long-lived people from the traditional Mediterranean diet, which it's also a very high-fat diet. So there really is no perfect ratio of macronutrients that we know of in the literature. There is no right answer to this. So that's why I call it macro confusion. Using protein, carbohydrates, and fat as food groups is dated, it's antiquated, and it leads to severe obfuscation, just this chronic confusion that we all suffer with. And it's confusing people from the layperson who's just trying to figure out what's healthy, all the way to researchers and healthcare professionals, as evidenced by what we're seeing, like what I described in the Lancet journal. So instead of what I proposed in this book, in the Plant-Based Nutrition Idiot's Guide 2 books ago, that's the 2018 guide, we have this image I'm going to show you now, a different way to, it's like a solution to macro confusion. And it's called the food triangle. This organization of energy density permits individuals to address the micronutrient needs, the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients that we need, that are required. Those are at the apex of the triangle. So we could address that, and we could still not drive chronic overnutrition, which are at the bottom 2 vertices of the triangle. So at that apex up there are the leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, stems such as asparagus and celery, bulbs like onion and garlic, and mushrooms. These foods at the top become the nutritional foundation of daily meals, rather than the more energy-dense alternatives. They also provide a rich source of phytonutrients and can be eaten in nearly unlimited quantities. And it also, because of all the different fibers there, it further places emphasis on foods that are increasingly important, that we're learning about, in terms of a healthy microbiome in the gut, which is becoming more and more fascinating by how important that gut microbiome is. You want to feed it for optimal health. So down each descending side of the food triangle, energy density increases. Food on the left side is sourced from animal products, and on the right side, sourced from plants. So we can look at the diets as combinations of the various sides of the food triangle, and it can be used to predict the success with various diets as well as health. Here we see the blue dots representing the type of diet. In Atkins or paleo, or now we hear keto all the time, those diets would be down the left side of the triangle. Perhaps controlling weight, that's why you hear people saying, oh, I lost so much weight on the keto diet, because it's limiting the starchy foods from the right side of the food triangle. Sometimes, one of these versions like the paleo diet or whatever, sometimes they include dairy or red meat or other specific animal source products, or they eliminate. So there's definitely some wiggle room in the definitions of those different diets. But if you think about a standard Western diet, this tends to be focused on just those bottom foods, right? So we call it bottom feeding, meat and potatoes, fish and chips, burger and fries, meat sauce and pasta, curry and rice. This makes for the most energy dense meals. And this is probably why obesity and chronic overnutrition is an unintended consequence of this type of eating. You may also kind of be surprised to notice that the vegetarian diet is also grouped in there, because even though there's some improvements by eliminating the meats, adding eggs and dairy to a whole food plant-based diet greatly expands the potential to bottom feed. Some examples would be like a quesadilla, a bean and cheese burrito, a cheese pizza, eggs in a bagel, fettuccine and a cream sauce. So this too can lead to weight gain and related chronic disease. Of course, making this even worse are those highly refined food adulterants. So we see a lot of foods, the highly processed foods that are infused with refined sugars, lots of salt, refined oils, and a lot of refined flours. That's not included in the food triangle because we see that a lot in our plates, but those are not whole foods. So now if you look at the right side of the triangle, you see a vegan diet, a plant-based diet. So we're emphasizing plant-sourced starches and then the nuts and seeds as the primary energy sources. The nuts and seeds are great as a source of phytonutrients and the necessary 1 to 3% of essential fatty acids that are required in the diet, also essential that we need to take in from our diet. So just a word of that caution, adding those excessive sugar, oil, salts, and flours, these unhealthy elements from the people are still struggling with their weight and noticing less than optimal health advantages than expected when sticking to a plant-based diet. I've been teaching this it's been about 17 years now. And this is the first time in the last 3, 4, 5 years that I'm seeing people come to me that have been vegan for a long time, and they're having very similar issues to the omnivores because they're eating all these highly processed foods. So that's what I normally see in the food journals and recommend advising to stay away from those as much as possible and keep them for special treats. So the food triangle, to visualize meals instead of protein, carbs, and fat, it helps eliminate that confusion, right, in the presentation of food and what we should eat. It makes discussing food far more practical for everyone, from the layperson to the healthcare professional that's trying to educate their patients. So the simplest way to say this is keep eating right. I want to assure you today, it doesn't matter where you get your protein. All living things contain the essential amino acids that all animals require. And if we get enough of these whole plant foods and we emphasize legumes and nuts and seeds, we're getting enough plant food. We're getting enough. If we're getting enough to meet our caloric needs, we're getting sufficient amino acids to support protein synthesis. A whole food plant-based diet provides plenty of nutrition. So it's time to leave the macronutrient labels behind and return the conversation back to real food. I love to say it like this because it's practical and people understand it. So I recommend to my audiences and my clients to eat a diet of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations. Keep it simple. So next, I want to show you that skipping meals doesn't destroy your metabolism. Another pervasive myth. We'll get away from the macros. I'm having technical problems with my keynote. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. It's going backwards. I don't know why it's doing this. This has never happened. I'm so sorry. Okay, here we go. Take 18. All right, how long do you think a person can survive without food? Now, I also love to do this in audience to see how many people can guess. So what is the longest you think someone has been documented to survive on a water-only medically supervised fast? I do not recommend you try this at home. I'm just asking what you think is documented the longest that someone has gone. So the answer is 382 days. So that's longer than a year without food. This one man, okay, to be fair, he was 27 years old. He did take a multivitamin for about 70 days. He took a little potassium for about 10 days, and he did a little bit of salt. He wasn't hospitalized for most of the fast, and he lost 276 pounds. I may have to just do this without my keynote because it's going backwards again. Try this. There we go. Okay, so isn't this kind of against everything we would have heard, right? Like he would have turned to a jellyfish if we lost all that muscle, right? Like people assume if you don't eat, you're going to lose all your muscle. Not that anyone should go 276 days without food. I'm not suggesting that, but it is against everything that we are taught. But if you think about it from an adaptive evolutionary perspective, is it a surprise that our energy storage organ or our fat tissue, our adipose tissue is used in times of scarcity? It's not really controversial if you think about it. And it's fascinating paper, but it also mentions all these other long-term fasts of 210 days, 249 days, and on and on and on, even one of 350 days. So my point today, of course, is not that everyone needs to use fasting for weight loss, but rather, how do we reconcile all of this dietary advice centered on eating every couple of hours and stoking your metabolism more and more and more, basically spending the entire day in the postprandial state, the fed state. But we also see this contradictory and well-documented medical case to also be true. My goodness. No, Laura, I don't know if you want to, if I should just, if you don't mind. I don't know why this is happening. Oh my goodness. Okay, all right. The photo on the upper left represents 5 pounds of body fat. That's my hand, so it's a lot. And it just looks very interesting to see it visually. So I was part of a metabolic experiment, losing 2 of these in about 18 days. I lost 10 pounds in about 18 days. So the idea that our body doesn't use our energy storage organ in times of no food just happens to not be true. Of course, we use fat in times of deficit. The animals that may have prioritized muscle and brains for fuel during times of no food are not just going to jump into the gene pool with the same gusto of our real ancestors that used fat. So let's take a quick look at metabolism, because we all use that word, and probably all too few of us, including physicians and dietitians, don't fully appreciate the details. So this on the bottom left was me having my metabolism measured. Yay, it worked. That little purple bean in the middle of the screen represents the mitochondrion. And of course, it's the power plant of nearly every cell in our body. Glucose or fat can be used as fuel, and when combined with the oxygen we breathe, they are oxidized or burned, producing the energy that fuels the body, along with, of course, carbon dioxide, water, and waste heat. So remember, all the fat loss during a diet escapes through your breath as carbon dioxide. So carefully measuring the carbon dioxide produced and the oxygen consumed in a mask like this, we can determine not only metabolic rate, but we can even determine how much fat or glucose I'm using minute by minute. It's a report that looks like this, and you'll see that my 4-hour fasted metabolic rate was 1,378, which is just a little higher than the standard equation predicted at 1,278. So normally, most people, if you're not on a weight loss kind of a program, you're just eating, doing your regular life, you would burn about half fat and half glucose, right? That's just how we would normally metabolize. We're not doing the keto diet, we're just eating a normal healthy diet. That's what we would predict. But because I was on a weight loss diet for the weeks prior to this metabolic measurement, I was actually burning 77.5% fat. So not 50-50, I was burning more fat. Here's another experiment our team performed to measure metabolic change over 42 days while sustaining a 27-pound weight loss with 3 different diet regimens. 2 were with food. So the first part was a whole food starch-based diet the first 2 weeks. And then it was like a salad, steamed veggies, nutritarian type diet the second 2 weeks. And the last 2 weeks was a water-only medically supervised fast. Note here, oh dear. Note here that his rapid weight loss remained constant. He lost weight as rapidly while eating the food diets, as he did by just eating or drinking water. So you always hear these fears of the metabolism crashing and holding on to fat, but the data just don't support this hypothesis. Oh my goodness, this is so frustrating. I don't even ever know how I get out of it. Okay, so I'm gonna get out of it again. Oh goodness, I'm so sorry, guys. So that's what we see, is that his metabolic rate represents the average decline as his metabolism adjusts downward with rate. So basically what's not often said is that this is what's predicted by this equation, the Harris-Benedict equation. For any of you that are in dietetics know that equation, and it's been this metabolic equation we've used since 1919. Basically our metabolism scales up and down with weight. So you don't break your metabolism by not eating, your metabolism is reflected by your weight, which is not what we hear very often. So starvation mode basically is a myth. Skipping meals doesn't destroy your metabolism. Instead, it scales with weight. So let's dig into the last of the 5 myths for today, that there is no perfect diet. When seeking answers on diet, many times it's the question that fails us. Some might ask, what did we eat? And some look to the past for guidance on a healthful human diet. I'm just going to read this. Human survival has always been predicated on the question of what can we eat? So in times of survival, our ability to process a wide range of natural materials as food has fueled our migration to every continent and a wide range of inhospitable environments. We're the most adaptive species on the planet. But my passion and quest for optimal health and nutrition has focused on yet another question. What should we eat? This question has so many answers, and sometimes they may even appear to be conflicting answers. Evolution is simply change over time, and it does not dictate diet. Our diet can be optimized for a whole wide range of different issues, including, of course, survival and health and reproduction, longevity, ideology, or even athletic competition. But there is no perfect diet. We are not designed to eat something or anything. You know, we could really survive on many things. And that's why we have inhabited such a vast diversity of environments on Earth. You know, finding a few paintings on a cave wall, because people like to reference that when it comes to a paleo diet, for example, it does not basically tell us, it's not the final word on what we should be eating. So if you say, what should we eat? If we think about it in that context, it opens up the conversation, allowing us to consider and build upon centuries of research and approaching it from a modern perspective, a perspective that incorporates all of the accumulated knowledge and technology. At the same time, is it possible that our current dietary standards, which resulted from surveying humans during the last century, a time of unparalleled shift to an unhealthy diet of affluence, might also have overemphasized some areas of nutrition and ignored others? How we ask and how we think about these questions and how we view nutrition may unintentionally limit the potential solutions. In wrapping up these 5 chronic myths, we've seen that overnutrition drives many chronic diseases and less is more for health span. We were able to untangle the macro confusion surrounding both the dietary carbohydrate and protein content of food. We saw that skipping meals, even over a year's worth of food, did not destroy metabolism. And finally, we demonstrated that diet can be optimized for many variables, that all approaches involve some compromise. So with our uncomfortable jolts out of the way and my terrible technology that is not helping, I wanted to give you some recommendations. And actually, this is the most important slide, so I've got to figure out how to get back out. There we go. Okay, the next one's the more important. Okay, so basically, like we said, a nutritious diet, a whole food plant-based diet is made up of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations. Here is one example, yay, that's the example I wanted to show you of what an overall wholesome diet could look like. It doesn't have to be perfect every day. I want to relax that idea that you have to eat exactly all of these servings every single day. It's just not that perfect of a science. But here's one example and kind of like a good overview of what could be included in a healthy diet. This is one that is full of color, variety, and balance. The USDA, the American Institute for Cancer Research, and Harvard School of Public Health all agree half of the plate should come from fruits and vegetables. Then we've got about a quarter of a plate, about 1 to 1.5 cups per day that come from legumes. So that's beans, lentils, peas, soy foods. I always say hummus should be a food group. And then whole grains such as quinoa, rice, and oats can substantiate meals for satiety and culinary diversity. Finally, fat should come from whole food sources such as nuts, seeds, and avocado, and should be used sparingly. There's an abundance of evidence showing cardiometabolic, weight management, and other advantages of consuming 1 to 2 ounces or 30 to 40 grams of nuts and seeds a day. It's about a half a cup, quarter cup, half cup. I recommend minimizing or even eliminating the use of oils, as they are 100% pure concentrated fat. They are not a whole food. They've got minimal nutrients and they make weight management more challenging. And as we talked about at the beginning, that is an issue. Most people come to me with an issue trying to lower or maintain a healthy weight. So that's an easy fix, because if you just make a few little tweaks in the kitchen, it's very easy to cook and bake without the use of oils. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics put out an updated position paper in late 2016 on vegetarian and vegan diets. And I just wanted to point out that they note that appropriately planned vegetarian, including completely plant-based or vegan diets, are considered nutritionally adequate, healthful, and may provide health benefits for all stages of the life cycle. And that includes pregnancy and lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, older adulthood, and athletes. In the book I referenced earlier, you can find an overview of nutritional needs from pregnancy to seniors, as well as specific needs for athletes. And if you're a healthcare professional, or if you need information to help inform your healthcare professional on plant-based diets, I have 2 peer-reviewed journal articles that you could download for free online that are specific for healthcare professionals. With a bit of mindfulness, yay. With a bit of mindfulness on some of the key notable nutrients and some of the background on how we are easy to utilize plant foods, here is just a little summary of some of the myriad health benefits associated with eating a whole food plant-based diet. These are the ones that are most well substantiated in the literature, but there's more and more coming out every day on other things. So here I could say that a plant-based diet is the only diet that we've ever seen that actually reverses advanced stage cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And a plant-based diet is associated with lower body mass index and body fat, lower overall mortality and mortality from ischemic heart disease, reduced medication requirements. I love to say results are typical, because in graduate school, I was never taught that when someone was on a medication, they can get off the medication. But I say results are typical because my clients get off their medications all the time. And it's so extraordinary. It's so exciting. It's also associated with the reduced incidence for the biggest problems: hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and hyperglycemia. And there's a reduced risk for certain cancers, especially colorectal cancer, and reduced obesity inflammatory markers. A plant-based diet supports living longer, not just living longer. My goodness. Okay. It doesn't matter. Actually, that's all I really needed to show you. I'm just going to finish the words that clearly all of these parts of food and nutrition matter: biochemistry and fuel and history and everything we know about nutrition. It's this complicated web of social and technical bias that more often than not, it makes it so confusing. John Lubbock said that what we see depends mainly on what we look for. All too often, this means our own personal biases are confirmed. These come in education, in media, and even in social circles. Everyone has an opinion on food. And so with all these contradictions, some of these opinions must be incorrect. So like if I could leave you with a simple message, it would be to look beyond what you hear and read about nutrition. It may be much simpler than it seems, and I'm confident that if you make an effort every day to just eat some more servings of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, you will see positive results. This is likely due both to the health promoting properties of plants, the extraordinary properties of plants, as well as the foods that are displaced off the plate, sourced foods. You don't need to begin at 100%. It's not all or nothing. And remember that every bite matters. After 17 years, I could say from my own personal experience, my blood panels have been fantastic. My weight has been easy to maintain, and I feel more energetic than I did in my 20s or my 30s. So thank you so much. And thank you for dealing with my crazy technology. And I am going to try to get out of here so that we could answer some questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Julieanna. It was incredible.
Thank you.
Some questions from the audience. The first one is that in the drawing that you showed that said that the egg is not a protein, would you explain that a little bit further? Because it's I see a lot that people say that, oh, they describe a plate and they say like the egg is your protein. And can you dive into that a little bit further?
You mean like why we shouldn't be saying this is a protein?
Exactly.
Because if you look at any food, any whole food and anything, if you look at like the potato was my good example of that, it has carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Every whole food has some ratio of those different macronutrients. So there is no whole, and one thing that would be entirely protein would be protein powder, because they've isolated out the protein. Or the one thing that would be pure fat would be oil, because they've isolated out, they took out all the carbohydrate and protein, and you're left with pure fat. Pure sugar, pure carbohydrate would be like refined sugar. You've taken out all of the fiber and all of the protein and fat from the cane or from wherever the sugar is sourced from beets. But if you look at any intact food, you've got any of those things I always talk about, or anything, there's a combination. And so if we stop talking about it like a protein, because it's not really a protein per se, there's plenty of fat in the egg yolk, and there's plenty of, everything's got something in it. And it's misleading for someone because you don't need a protein. You just want to rethink the plate. And if we're eating, I prioritize the 6 daily threes. So if you go to my website, plantbaseddietitian.com, you could see this whole thing about 6 daily threes. And if you're getting your legumes, and it looks like that plate that I shared with you, and you're getting your even quinoa, or even rice has a lot of protein. Broccoli has a lot of protein. So if we just, it doesn't even make sense to think about food in those terms, because food doesn't really live like that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And Sharon commented that protein deficiency is a ploy to sell protein shakes. And I have to say, I agree. Can you go a little bit into that? Like, why is there such a fear around protein deficiency?
Right. In my 25 years in the health and fitness industry, I have not yet seen a protein deficiency. Unless you are not getting enough calorie, you can't not get enough protein, because we really only need 10 to 12% of our calories to come from that. And I'm the dietitian that doesn't count anything. So I don't have my clients count calories or macros or any of that, but it's not necessary. If you're getting adequate calorie, you're getting adequate of everything. And if you're getting it from whole foods and enough calorie, there's just no way around it. It'd be really challenging. I've tried to work up on a nutrient spreadsheet, like what happens if you eat blah, blah, blah. The only way to do it is if you're eating a lot of white flour and white sugar and oils, then you would run the risk of not getting enough. But I just, instead of that, just eat whole foods, and stop worrying about it.
Okay, perfect. What tips do you give your patients transitioning to a plant-based diet? How do you start?
Oh, it's such a good question. Thank you for that. First, have fun. Like, it's like always so restrictive, right? Everyone's like, oh, what do I have to give up? But really, you're giving up like 7 ingredients, right? Meat and chicken and fish and dairy or whatever. But the truth is that if you think about it as a fun kind of experience and experiment, and you discover new ingredients, like, oh, I've never tried this kind of lentil before. I've never heard of a dragon fruit or something that you've not tried. And then you start to incorporate that and you start to try new recipes. And nowadays, it's never been better time to change to a plant-based diet, because now you just plug into the Google, right? You just plug into Google what you love to eat. So if you love to eat whatever it is, and you just could find it plant-based. So it's very, very easy, because you don't even have to reinvent the wheel. The recipes are already out there. There's thousands of recipes published on Google and books galore that are filled with these delicious recipes. So have fun. Discover things. You might want to find like-minded people. That does help to have social circles or groups online. Social media has a lot of groups, so that you could do it, together with people. A lot of times the whole family doesn't want to go in that direction with you, and that's okay. You just have to take care of you. My new book coming out and my new podcast is called Choose You Now. And as soon as you take care of you, then you're able to help everyone around you. So if you want to eat healthy and you want to transition to a plant-based diet, then you get to be the lighthouse, and you'll inspire those around you. But the goal is to really do it for yourself and figure it out for yourself first. So very positive thinking, explore, find your recipes, find your new favorite foods. And I'll also say this, we're all very much creatures of habit. Most of us eat the same breakfast every day. Most of us rotate between maybe 2 or 3 or 4 lunches, maybe 3 to 5 dinners in a week. We really tend to kind of repeat. So that means all you need is about 10 new recipes that are plant-based. So simple, like anyone could find 10 recipes that you love. You have to find stuff you love, and then you rotate. And then when you love something, you save that recipe, and then you find another one, and you just build your repertoire of delicious recipes that you want to put into the regular rotation. So it's very simple. You don't have to go, oh my gosh, I need to know. You don't need to make it very complicated. I try to keep it as simple and positive and fun and delicious as possible.
Definitely. I totally agree that it's a muscle, and it's something that just gets better with time. At first you're lost, and then you finally find your way. Okay. In the myth about metabolism, what are your thoughts about intermittent fasting?
Yes. Well, intermittent fasting can mean all sorts of things. There's all these different interpretations. In fact, there's so many interpretations. It could be like every other day, or eating for this amount of this fed window. And that the truth is, there's so much evidence that just limiting your eating window and increasing your fasted window on a regular basis is so supportive of long-term health. What's so interesting too, that's what I was trying to pin together, is that maybe one of the reasons a whole food plant-based diet is so extraordinarily healthy is because it's lower. It usually could be lower in calorie, so you're eating less. So remember that less is more message. So I do recommend time restricted eating. That's how I interpret it, where you're getting every day, you're getting a fasted window. Like right now, I'm really excited because I normally eat at the top of the hour. So I'm getting really hungry, and I usually eat 1 or 2 meals a day, and I keep it in a window, a boundaried window. And the evidence seems to support 6 hours or 8 hours of being in the fed state, because the time off of food, when you're not eating, your body is able to do all of that metabolic housework that it can't do while you're digesting it and absorbing. So basically, when you have food going through your system, from the last bite, you are metabolizing and you're breaking it down, and you're all that stuff that's very intensive for the body. And when you're not doing that, your body can get rid of extra cancer cells and bacteria and just clean up, there's this autophagy that happens. So it's a really healthy thing to incorporate into your life. And, there's also people that recommend the long-term water fasting in 3 to 5 days. Don't do that without a medical supervision, of course. But something that you could implement on a regular daily basis is just to extend that fasted window and just to wait for your first meal, or to have your first meal and stop a little bit earlier, but just to find a window in the day that works for you and your schedule and your lifestyle and your social situation. I modify it for my clients depending on if they want to eat dinner with their family, if they prefer having breakfast, whatever. Like, everyone's got a little different lifestyle, but it's easy to incorporate into your life, and it can make a really extraordinary difference.
Incredible. Thank you. And how do you convince your patients that it is budget friendly to transition to a plant-based diet?
Right. Well, like any diet, there's a wide spectrum of what you eat. So here's how I say it. You can have at home, you could have beans and rice, and you could buy beans and rice for very affordable. You could buy the dried beans and the dried rice, and it could be, you could eat for less than $5 a day easy. And I don't know how to translate the currency, I'm sorry. But it's very, very inexpensive. Then you can go very extraordinary, and you can go have, no matter what diet, you could go have a really, go to a restaurant and have a very exquisite portobello mushroom Wellington, like a very fancy meal. And there's everything in between, right? So you go to convenient budget stores. You guys have warehouse. My parents recently moved part-time to Mexico, so I'm learning all the different stores there. But I haven't been there yet. I'm dying to go. Can't wait. But the warehouse stores where you can get buy in bulk, that's a great way to save money. We have farmers markets here where you could buy produce for less expensive. Growing your own food is always helpful, but it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be all organic, and don't worry about all of those things. You just want to start looking at what you could find for the more affordable prices. But I wrote a whole program for a food bank where we were doing this for under $5 a day, or even less than that. And you could really make it work in any budget. So you don't have to get the convenience foods, or you can get like those, so many convenience foods available now, but you pay more, you pay a premium for it. So if you're prioritizing budget, or you want to figure out what you prioritize budget on, do the whole, get as much as you can for the lesser cost and the more simple staple foods, which is healthier anyway, right? Any of those processed, vegan meats and vegan cheeses, that stuff's really expensive, and it's not even really as whole as we want you to go anyway. I'd rather you eat the simple staple foods.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I actually have a testimony on this. When I went to study abroad, I used to spend from 15 to 25 euros a week on worth of food it's pretty similar to the dollar. And it's so funny how everybody was spending, much more money, and they thought that I was going to be the most expensive of them all, when I was just buying, oats, lentils, rice, all these staple foods and fruits and vegetables in season. So I think that's really important, and it's nothing to worry about. Okay, I have a question. What's with all the people blaming carbs for diabetes, for sugar for diabetes?
Right, because really it's like the saturated fat that's really promoting diabetes. All you have to do is look at all of the research that's reversed diabetes. Look at Dr. Neil Barnard's work. If you really want to look at the science on it, it's amazing. Like, you switch them to a plant-based diet, which is, I guess, higher in carbs, and they reverse they get off medications, their blood glucose, their hemoglobin A1C normalizes. I see with my clients all the time. So much so that if they're on medication, I have them in very, very close contact with their physician, because they have to temper down the medication so they don't have a hypoglycemic episode because of their medication, because their blood sugar starts normalizing really rapidly. The reason carbs get a bad rap is because nobody knows what a carb is. And of course, if you're eating, like I said before, my comparison was a refined sugar cereal, like a cereal. If you're eating that versus a lentil stew, that's going to be very differently metabolized through your body. These foods are not isometabolic. And when you look at the research, they lump those together, and then everyone is so confused. So that's why, if we don't worry about carbs and we just think about eating these whole intact foods, we're going to have all these fibers intact, right? The fiber is what absorbs sugar from the bloodstream and brings it out, and it absorbs all that stuff, and it helps temper the rate of digestion and absorption. So eating a whole food plant-based diet, and not those refined foods, which is what we're recommending, it's what actually reverses and reduces your risk for ever getting type 2 diabetes. And I know all these people that are even with type 1 diabetes, not that you could reverse type 1 diabetes, of course, I'm not trying to claim that by any means, But I know a lot of people with type 1 diabetes that eat a very, very high, they'll do like a very, very high carb, low fat, like high fruit diet, you know, those fruitarians, and they're sustaining a very healthy blood sugar on a lower medication rate. So again, don't do that without help, but it's incredible how impactful diet is on your blood sugar levels.
Yes, Robbie and Cyrus from Mastering
Yes.
Diet. The amount of fruit that they eat is absolutely insane. I love
Yes.
it. Okay, there is not any more questions. Let's see if anybody else asks a question. If not, we can just wrap it up. Okay, we have more. Fabiola says, I believe that one of the keys is in the quality and the preparation of food. We have so much work to do in Mexico. Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do everywhere in the world. And I'm so glad that you guys are doing this. I think it's fantastic. And it's just, information is so powerful, and like learning and seeing, and then when you experience it yourself, like that's what happened for me. Like I learned about it, and then I finally did it. And this is before internet and all that. And I was like, I finally did it myself. And it was like, it changed everything for my health. And I was like, oh my gosh, what will it do with my clients? You know, and then I started experimenting. It was like, now I just can't stop talking about it because it's so effective. And I think everyone, you know, just opening your eyes. And my father was in the hospital there. He was in Puerto Vallarta in February. And his doctor said to him, oh, it doesn't matter what you eat, just don't have coffee and alcohol. He had had a stroke. And so that messaging is what really needs to be changed. That's why I'm so glad you're talking to healthcare professionals. And that's where the message really is important, because people trust their doctor implicitly. And so I'm really glad that you're doing what you're doing.
Definitely, doctors need a little bit more nutrition training, no doubt about that. Aline is asking if you have books in Spanish. Are your books in Spanish?
That's such a good question. I've been dying to get them translated into Spanish. And I think I saw on Amazon that someone translated one of mine in Spanish, but I can't be certain. So that's a very good question. Write to my publishers.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, yeah, because we definitely need a lot more material in Spanish, because the majority of the information comes from English sources. So I think that it's way more accessible to people to have it in Spanish here in Mexico.
I agree. I hope that happens soon. I'm sure it will.
Yes, definitely. It's the start. Well, thank you so much, Julieanna, for this. It's been a pleasure sharing. Oh, one more question. Hi, Julieanna. I just wanted to ask, I eat legumes every day and I combine them with vitamin C foods, and I still have iron deficiency problems. Is there a way to increase iron absorption?
Yeah, vitamin C with your iron-rich foods is really important. Mix it up, you know, avoid eating or drinking coffee or tea with your food. You can also avoid like the higher phytate foods, like maybe have different, the lower, like have different types of greens, like mix it up. You don't want to have the stuff that inhibits absorption. Like I wouldn't recommend spinach. Spinach is high in iron, but it's also high in oxalate, so the absorption doesn't happen so easily. So prioritize things like kale and lettuce and cabbage and broccoli and all those things, as opposed to spinach and Swiss chard. A lot of people go right to spinach. I don't know how it is there in terms of your access to leafy greens, but mixing it up. And you know, sometimes it just happens, like if you're pregnant or if you have heavy periods, you have a tendency to have iron deficiency anemia. Definitely, if you're still consuming dairy, cut that out, because dairy can inhibit iron absorption as well. But it's just a matter of like monitoring it and eating those foods regularly, and eating them together with the like you said, the vitamin C rich foods with the iron rich foods, and avoiding those high oxalate foods, and avoiding coffee and tea. So, and if you're taking any kind of supplementation or anything, do it separate also from coffee and tea. That tends to, and hot chocolate, that tends to interfere with absorption.
Okay, amazing. So if nobody else has any more questions, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Julieanna. Y gracias a todos por conectarse. Thank you, everybody. Have an amazing day. Les quiero presentar, bueno, imagino que ustedes ya, I'm talking about the conference that we're going to be having here in Mexico. I'm going to share my screen a little bit. Okay, this is the conference. Okay. Y les dejé la página web ahí en el chat, la vuelvo a poner. So you can sign up and come to the first conference here in Mexico. It's going to be incredible. Monterrey, Mexico, Arboleda. Okay, well, that was it for the commercial pause. Okay. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.